It was said to be a place where shadows lingered even in the brightest of days, a house that breathed, groaned, and whispered secrets to those who dared to listen. And the Bennett family, well, they dared and paid the price. The story begins with Benjamin Bennett, a man who on the surface had everything. He was wealthy, respected, and determined to carve out a future for his family. In 1902, Benjamin, along with his wife Margaret and their young children, moved to a secluded farm in the quiet, windswept hills of North Wales. The farm, though picturesque and full of promise, stood on land with a dark history, a history none of them could have known about. The land, it was whispered in the nearby village, had once been home to a long-lost tribe, a tribe whose rituals and sacrifices had been forgotten by time, but never erased by the earth itself. There were rumors that the tribe's blood had been spilled in a gruesome ritual, their spirits now bound to the land, cursing anyone who dared to live on it. Benjamin, unaware of these ominous stories, believed he was building a better life for his family, but that belief would be tested in ways he never anticipated. Benjamin worked tirelessly to make the land thrive, but it fought back. The crops failed year after year. No matter how much care and attention he lavished on them, the livestock became sickly, and every attempt to remedy the situation failed. He sought advice from local farmers, but all were perplexed. It wasn't just the land. There was something in the very air around the farmhouse that felt wrong. Margaret, his devoted wife, was the first to notice it. She began having strange dreams, vivid nightmares filled with shadows, and strange figures who spoke in whispers. Benjamin dismissed it as nothing more than stress, but Margaret could feel something else, a heavy presence in the house that grew stronger with each passing night. And then came the strange occurrences. It started subtly. A chair that had been moved when no one had touched it, a door that creaked open by itself. But soon the phenomena grew harder to ignore. One evening, as Benjamin sat in the study, he heard footsteps from the attic. At first he assumed it was the wind, but the footsteps were deliberate, echoing through the wooden floors with a sense of purpose. He climbed up to the attic, but there was nothing there. Over time, the house seemed to take on a life of its own. The air grew thick with unease. Margaret's health deteriorated rapidly. She was no longer the vibrant woman Benjamin had married. Her face became gaunt, her eyes hollow, as if the weight of something unseen was wearing her down. Benjamin tried everything, doctors, remedies, but nothing helped. He was on the edge of losing everything: his wife, his family, his sanity. Then came the night when things took a more sinister turn. Benjamin woke in the middle of the night to the sound of whispers. At first, he thought it was a dream, but the whispers grew louder, more distinct. They seemed to come from the walls themselves, murmuring in a language he couldn't understand. Desperate for answers, he sought out old records in the village, searching for any clue that could explain what was happening. It was then that he learned the truth. In the old archives of the village library, Benjamin found a map, one that marked the land he had chosen to build his home on with a single red X. The map had been drawn centuries ago during the early 1800s. The notes on the map read, "The land is cursed. The blood spilled here will never rest. Those who claim it will suffer, and their names will be begotten." Benjamin was stunned. He dismissed it at first, thinking it was nothing more than superstition. But when he returned to the house, the whispers continued. They were louder now, more insistent, as if the very land was calling to him. But that was only the beginning. The following months were marked by a series of strange, increasingly violent occurrences. The house seemed to take on a life of its own. Benjamin's nightmares grew worse, filled with strange figures, standing at the foot of his bed, watching him with hollow eyes. Margaret too began to act strangely, her once kind nature now replaced with a cold, distant demeanor. And the children, their beloved children, were not spared. Their son John, once a bright and happy boy, began to withdraw. He spoke to no one, not even his younger sister Alice. He would sit for hours staring out the window, his face pale, his eyes empty, as though he could see something no one else could. Margaret would find him in the attic late at night, muttering words under his breath. He would wake in the middle of the night, screaming in terror, but when asked what had frightened him, he would only say, "It's here, it's come." By the time John reached the age of 16, the family was unraveling. One night, after hearing strange sounds coming from the attic once again, John went upstairs to investigate. He never came back down. The next morning, the family found his body in the attic, his eyes wide open, his face twisted in fear. There were no signs of a struggle, no explanation for his death. The doctors couldn't determine the cause, but the family knew the truth. It was the curse. The tragedy of John's death was the final blow to Benjamin. He could no longer deny that something far darker than his worst fears was at work. The curse had taken his son, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. He fell deeper into despair, his mind slowly unraveling, as the house seemed to swallow him whole. Margaret, now gravely ill, also couldn't escape the curse. She too passed away, her body cold and lifeless, her eyes staring at the same shadows that had claimed their son. And Alice, their remaining child, was left alone in the house, a place that had now become a tomb. But the curse was not done with the Bennet family. It was only just beginning. The land, the house, and the spirits trapped within it would not rest until every generation had been claimed, until the bloodline was consumed. And as Alice stood in the remnants of her family's once proud home, she knew that the curse wasn't just a tale, it was real, and she was its next victim. Alice Bennet stood in the heart of the old farmhouse, the walls creaking under the weight of its age. The house that had once been filled with laughter and warmth was now a hollow shell of memories, its rooms cold and silent, as though the very air held the ghosts of the past. Her parents were gone, and her brother John was lost to the curse that had haunted their family for generations. But Alice refused to believe that this would be her fate. She was determined to break the cycle of suffering that had consumed the Bennet bloodline for so long. Yet, the weight of the curse pressed heavily on her chest, suffocating her every step. Since the tragic death of John, Alice had tried to move on, to continue with her life as best as she could, but the house wouldn't let her forget. It didn't matter how many times she left, how far she traveled, she always felt its pull, like a force that reached out from the very earth beneath her feet. There was something malevolent here, something that fed off the pain of her family, something that would never let go. Alice had spent months trying to find answers. She combed through every old book she could get her hands on, searching for some explanation, some way to rid herself of the curse that had claimed her loved ones. She consulted historians, old villagers who whispered in hushed tones, and even spiritualists, but all she heard were the same stories. The curse had been laid on the land long before the Bennets ever arrived, and it was said to be unbreakable. Some claimed it was the work of an ancient deity, angered by the blood spilled on the land in times long past. Others believed it was a dark pact made by her ancestors, one that had bound their family to the land forever. But none of these explanations offered her any peace. She wanted to understand why. Why had her family been cursed? Why had the land chosen them? And then came the letters. It was late one night when Alice found the first one, buried beneath an old pile of books in the attic. The paper was yellowed with age, the ink faded, but the words were still legible. It was a letter written by Benjamin, her grandfather, to his brother Samuel, a man Alice had never met. The letter spoke of things she had never been told, dark things, dangerous things. Benjamin had written it in a frantic scrawl, as though he feared someone might find it and destroy it before he could finish. The letter read, "The curse is real, Samuel. I've seen it with my own eyes. It follows us. No matter where we go, we cannot escape it. It is in the walls, in the very ground we walk on. I've heard the whispers, and I've seen the shadows moving in the corners of my eyes. I fear for Margaret and the children. I fear that we are marked for death. The land will not let us go." The words sent a chill down Alice's spine. She knew her grandfather had been a man of great conviction, but to read that he had felt so utterly helpless, so lost in the face of something so sinister, shook her to her core.
She had always wondered why her family had left such a legacy of silence and isolation. But now she understood. The curse had driven them all to madness. One by one, Alice read the letter over and over again, each time feeling more hopeless than the last. It confirmed everything she had feared. The curse was not just a figment of her imagination. It was real, and it had claimed the lives of those who had come before her, slowly but surely. But what disturbed her the most was the part that had been hastily scratched out, as though Benjamin hadn't wanted anyone to read it. She could barely make out the words, but they seemed to speak of a ritual, something that might have been done to stop the curse, but failed. The very thought of it sent a cold shiver down her spine. She had to know more. The next few days were filled with research, digging deeper into her family's history and the dark secrets that had been hidden for generations. She found more letters, more documents, each one more disturbing than the last. The curse seemed to be linked to a ritual, an ancient ceremony, performed long before the Bennets ever set foot on the land. According to one of the letters, Benjamin had believed that the only way to break the curse was to confront the source of the evil itself, but no one had ever returned from attempting it. The more Alice uncovered, the more she realized that the answers were buried in the very house she had grown up in, the house that seemed to watch her every move. It wasn't just a home, it was a prison, a place where the walls held memories, the air was thick with unseen forces, and the past refused to stay buried. One night, after days of sleepless research, Alice decided to confront the house. She knew she couldn't keep running from it. She had to face whatever was lurking in the shadows, whatever had caused the curse to take hold of her family. With a heavy heart and a mind full of fear, she entered the house once more. The house seemed different now, as if it recognized her defiance. The air was colder, the floorboards creaked louder than usual, and the house itself seemed to groan with anticipation. She made her way up to the attic, where she had found the first letter, and began to search for more clues. The moonlight filtering through the dusty windows cast long shadows across the room, making the place feel even more oppressive. As she moved toward the far corner of the attic, something caught her eye. A small chest, half hidden beneath a pile of old furniture. She moved cautiously toward it, her heart pounding in her chest. The chest was old, covered in dust, and seemed to have been untouched for years. She hesitated for a moment before opening it.
Inside was a collection of old objects, each one tied to a memory. There were photographs, letters, and strange trinkets, things she couldn't explain. But what caught her attention most of all was the book. It was an old, leather-bound diary, its pages yellowed with age. The cover was inscribed with strange symbols, symbols Alice had seen before in the letters from her grandfather. She could hardly believe her eyes. This was the book Benjamin had mentioned in his letter, the one that held the answers. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The first few pages were filled with cryptic notes, writings that made no sense, but as she turned further into the book, the words became clearer, more coherent, and what she read sent a chill down her spine. The diary was older than Alice had expected, decades older in fact. Its pages were thick with dust, and the leather binding was cracked in places, as though it had been shoved aside for years. The writing inside, though, was clear, written with the careful hand of someone who understood the weight of what they were recording. Alice ran her fingers over the pages, her heart racing. It was as though the diary had been waiting for her. Her grandfather Benjamin had written these words. The sense of dread she'd felt earlier now intensified as she realized that she had stumbled upon something far darker than she had ever imagined. The book was not simply a collection of family records. It was a chronicle of a forbidden secret that had been passed down through generations, secrets that no one dared speak of. The first few entries were innocuous enough. Benjamin had written about his daily life, his family, the struggles of raising children in a world that seemed to grow darker with every passing year. But as Alice turned the pages, the tone shifted. The entries became more frantic, more desperate, as though Benjamin had realized the gravity of the situation too late. "The land calls to us, Samuel," one entry read. "I feel its pull in the depths of my soul. It is not just a place, it is alive. And it remembers, the curse is not of this world, and I fear that even if we leave, it will follow. Alice's fingers froze on the page. The curse. Her heart skipped a beat. The words Benjamin had written echoed the same fears she had heard from the villagers. Fears that had been passed down from generation to generation. Fears that had always been dismissed as mere superstition. But now in her hands, the truth was becoming clearer. The curse was real, and it was connected to the very land her family had lived on. The next pages were filled with details about the ritual Benjamin had been researching, the ritual that he believed had brought the curse upon their family. According to the diary, it had all started with a blood pact made long before her family ever arrived on the land. Benjamin's ancestors had come to this house under the guise of wealth and opportunity, but they had unknowingly walked into the web of an ancient, malevolent force that had been waiting for them. "We are not the first," Benjamin wrote. "The land has always been cursed. It was a place of death, long before the first stone of this house was laid. The ritual that bound us here was not our doing, but we are bound nonetheless. The bloodlines are intertwined, and there is no escape." Alice felt the weight of his words settle in her chest. She had known on some level that the house had been built on cursed land, but to read about it so plainly, to realize that her own ancestors had unknowingly walked into this trap, was almost more than she could bear. The curse wasn't just a punishment for the actions of one generation. It was something ancient, something woven into the very fabric of the land. The next few entries were written with increasing urgency, as though Benjamin was running out of time. He had discovered that the ritual could be undone, but it would require a great sacrifice, a sacrifice that no one in their right mind would be willing to make. According to the diary, the ritual involved the blood of the direct descendant of the first family to settle on the land, someone who was bound by blood to the house and its curse. "I have found the way," Benjamin wrote, "but it is too much. To break the curse, to free us from this terrible fate, I must offer my own blood. The ritual must be completed by one of our bloodline, someone whose soul is linked to this house. I have no choice." Alice's hands trembled as she read the words. Benjamin was talking about himself. He had come to the same conclusion she had. The curse could only be broken by one of the Bennett family, but at a tremendous cost. The ritual required the life of the one who sought to free them. But why hadn't Benjamin gone through with it? Why hadn't he broken the curse before it consumed him? The answer came a few pages later. "I cannot do it. I cannot make the sacrifice. The house, it resists me. I can feel its presence, watching me, whispering to me in the dead of night. I have tried to leave, but it will not let me. I am trapped here, bound by blood and by fate. The house will not allow me to escape. It will not allow any of us to leave." Alice's breath caught in her throat. The house was alive. It was not just a building. It was a sentient force, one that fed off the suffering of those who lived within its wall. She had always suspected that something was wrong with the house, but to read about it in her grandfather's words, to know that the very walls of this place had the power to trap her family here, was a terrifying revelation. As Alice turned the pages, the final entries grew more fragmented, the handwriting more erratic. Benjamin had become obsessed, driven to madness by the curse that had claimed his family. He had begun to hear voices, to see things that weren't. He believed the house was alive, that it fed on their fears, on their pain. "It has taken John," one entry read. "It will take all of us. I can hear them whispering to me in the dark. It is too late for me, but I must try. I must break the curse before it takes us all." Alice's heart pounded in her chest as she read the final words her grandfather had written. They were a warning, an anguished plea for help. "To my descendants, if you find this, do not stay. Do not try to break the curse. It is too late. The house will never let you go. I have seen the truth. The curse is not something we can escape. It is something that is part of us. It lives inside us." Benjamin had failed. The curse had consumed him, just as it had consumed every member of her family. Alice was the last of the Bennets, the final hope. But what was she supposed to do now?
The diary closed with a heavy thud as Alice let it drop into her lap. She sat there for a long moment, the words echoing in her mind. The house, the curse, her family's tragic fate, all of it weighed heavily on her heart. She had hoped that by coming here, she could find a way to break the cycle. But now, after reading the diary, Alice wasn't sure there was any way out. The curse had claimed her family for generations, and now it was coming for her. The air inside the old house was thick with silence, an oppressive stillness that seemed to weigh down on Alice's chest. She had just finished reading her grandfather's diary, a revelation that had shaken her to the core. The pages had told a story of dark secrets, of a curse that spanned generations, and of a family that had been consumed by something far older and more terrifying than they could have imagined. Now, sitting in the house that had been both home and prison to her ancestors, Alice wondered if she was the last hope of breaking the cycle, or if the curse had already claimed her. She stood slowly, the diary still in her hands, her mind raced. Every inch of the house seemed to hum with a strange energy, as though it was alive, watching her. The house had been a witness to her family's darkest moments, and now it seemed to be waiting for her to make the next move. Alice walked through the house, her footsteps echoing in the empty room. The once grand mansion was now a decaying shell, its walls covered in dust, and its floors creaking under her weight. The windows were boarded up, blocking out the sunlight, and the air was thick with the smell of mildew and decay. The house felt abandoned, yet Alice couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't alone. It was as though the walls themselves were alive, breathing in time with her every movement. As Alice made her way to the old staircase, her eyes were drawn to the portraits hanging on the walls. These were the faces of her ancestors, the ones who had come before her and had fallen victim to the curse. The paintings were faded and cracked, but their eyes seemed to follow her as she moved, a silent reminder of the price her family had paid. She reached the top of the stairs and paused, looking down the long hallway that stretched out before her. The door to her grandfather's study was at the end of the hall, and she knew she had to go there. There was something about that room, something important, that called to her. It was as though the answers she sought were hidden within its walls. Taking a deep breath, Alice walked down the hallway, her footsteps slow and deliberate. She passed the other rooms, her grandmother's old bedroom, the parlor where her parents had spent so many hours, and felt a strange sense of disconnection. This house had been her family's home for generations, but now it felt foreign to her, as though it had ceased to be a place of comfort and safety and had become a tomb. When Alice reached the study, she hesitated for a moment before pushing open the door. The room was dark, the only light coming from a single flickering candle on the desk. The shelves were lined with books, many of them ancient and brittle, their spines cracked and worn. But it was the desk that caught her attention. There in the center of the room sat the old writing desk where her grandfather had spent so many hours. It was covered in dust, and the chair was pushed back, as though it had been abandoned in haste. Alice moved toward the desk, her fingers brushing over the there, hidden beneath a pile of old papers, she found what she had been searching for, a small wooden box. The box was intricately carved, the patterns on its surface matching the symbols she had seen in her grandfather's diary. She opened it slowly, the creak of the hinges echoing through the room. Inside the box was a collection of items, pieces of jewelry, faded letters, and a small blood-stained cloth. Alice's heart raced as she picked up the cloth, her fingers trembling. She could feel the weight of it, the weight of the curse that had been passed down through the generations. This was no ordinary cloth. It was part of the ritual, part of the dark pact that had bound her family to the land. The letters inside the box were written in her grandfather's handwriting, but the words were scattered and disjointed as though he had been writing in a frenzy. Alice read them aloud, her voice echoing in the silent room. I cannot escape it. The land calls to me, calls to all of. I have tried to leave, but it will not let me. The curse is too strong. It is in our blood, in our very souls. I have seen the truth. The house will never let us go. It is too late for me. But perhaps if I leave these records, my descendants will be able to break the cycle. But it is dangerous. The house will fight back. It will not let you leave. Alice's heart raced as she read the final words. Her grandfather had known. He had known that the house would fight against anyone who tried to break the curse. It wasn't just a place of evil. It was a living, breathing entity that had ensnared her family for generations. But why hadn't he done something to stop it? Why had he left these records for her to find? As she continued to search through the box, Alice found something that made her blood run cold. A small, ancient key. It was old, its metal tarnished with age, but there was something about it that felt familiar, as though it had been waiting for her. She knew without a doubt that this key was the key to unlocking the curse, the key to breaking the cycle that had bound her family to this house. But where did it fit? And what was she willing to risk to free herself and her family from the curse that had haunted them for so long? Alice stood there for a moment, the key in her hand, her mind racing. The house seemed to be watching her, waiting for her to make the next move. She could feel its presence, a dark, oppressive force that filled the room. It wanted her to fail. It wanted her to be just another victim in its endless cycle of torment. But Alice was determined. She would not let the house win. She would break the curse, no matter the cost.
With the key in hand, Alice turned and walked out of the study, her heart pounding in her chest. The house would not let her leave easily, but she had no intention of giving up. She had come this far, and now she had to see it through. The curse would be broken. She would make sure of it. Alice's hands shook as she gripped the ancient key, her thoughts swirling like the dust motes in the dim light of the study. She knew that the next steps she took would seal her fate. The key was her last hope, the only thing standing between her and the truth that her grandfather had hidden for so many years. She had no idea what she was walking into, but there was no turning back now. She made her way down the narrow hallway, each creaking floorboard beneath her feet feeling like a betrayal. The house seemed to close in around her, its oppressive presence a constant reminder that she was not welcome here. She had heard the stories, the whispers of her family's history, the rumors of the curse that had gripped them for generations. But until now she hadn't truly understood the extent of it. The house was more than just a building. It was a living, breathing thing, and it would do whatever it took to keep its secrets buried. Alice reached the front door, but something stopped her. She hesitated, the cold, clammy air of the house wrapping around her like a vice. The key burned in her hand, a constant reminder that she had to keep moving forward. She turned and walked to the back of the house, where her grandfather had often spent his time in solitude. It was there, in the darkest corner of the estate, that the secrets lay. The back of the house was a labyrinth of rooms and corridors, a place that had always been shrouded in mystery. She had never been allowed to explore this part of the house. Her parents had warned her to stay away from the back rooms. "The house will make you forget yourself," they had said. But now, with the key in her hand, Alice felt a strange pull toward it. She needed to understand what had happened to her family. She needed to know why they had been cursed, why they had been bound to this house. As she passed through the old kitchen, she saw the remnants of her family's once thriving life. The stove was cold, the cupboards empty. The house had swallowed up all the warmth, all the life. The coldness was suffocating, pressing in on her from all sides. Alice reached a door at the far end of the kitchen, one that she had never dared open as a child. Her heart raced as she inserted the key into the lock, the metal groaning in protest. She turned it slowly, the door creaking open with an eerie sound that echoed through the empty house. Beyond the door lay a narrow staircase that descended into darkness. With a deep breath, Alice stepped onto the first stair. The air grew colder the further she descended, the silence pressing in around her like a heavy weight. The staircase was steep, the walls damp and covered in old cobwebs. The further she went, the more she felt like she was being drawn into the bowels of the house itself. It was as if the house was alive, pulling her toward its heart. At the bottom of the stairs, Alice found herself standing in a small windowless room. The walls were bare,
save for a single faded painting that hung crookedly on the far wall. It was a portrait of a woman, her face obscured by shadows, her eyes empty and hollow. Alice stared at it for a long time. The feeling of being watched overwhelmed. The air in the room was thick, and she could feel the weight of the house pressing down on her. This was it, the place her grandfather had warned her about. The place where the curse had begun. Alice's breath caught in her throat as she noticed something on the floor. A small wooden box, half buried beneath the dust. She reached down and picked it up, her fingers trembling as she brushed away the dirt. The box was old, its edges worn smooth from years of use. She knew without a doubt that it was connected to the curse, connected to the house. The key had brought her here for a reason. She opened the box slowly, the hinges creaking in protest. Inside there was a stack of papers, yellowed with age. Alice picked them up one by one, reading the faded handwriting. The papers were full of strange symbols and cryptic notes. Her grandfather's journal, just like the one she had read earlier. But these were different. These pages were darker, filled with desperation. The writing seemed frantic, as though her grandfather had been racing against time to record his thoughts. "It is too late," one of the entries read. "The house will not let us go. It has taken us, body and soul. It will not release us. No matter what we do, we are bound to it. We are bound to the curse." Alice's blood ran cold as she read the words. Her grandfather had known. He had known that the house would never let them go. It wasn't just a house. It was a prison built on generations of suffering, a prison built to keep them trapped in its grip for all eternity. The last page in the box was the most chilling. It was a letter, written in her grandfather's handwriting, but the words were unrecognizable. The letters were jumbled, like the scrawlings of a madman. Alice could barely make sense of it, but there was one phrase that stood out above all the others. "If you are reading this, it is already too late." Alice closed the box slowly, her mind racing. The house was fighting back. It was trying to stop her from uncovering the truth. But she couldn't stop now. She had come this far. She had come this far. She had to finish what her family had started, no matter the cost. She stood up, the weight of the box in her hands, and turned to face the dark corridor that stretched out before her. The house was silent again, but Alice knew it was watching. It was waiting, and so was she. Alice sat still in the dimly lit room, her mind reeling from the journal entries she had just uncovered. The weight of her grandfather's words pressed down on her like a vice. "If you are reading this, it is already too late." The phrase echoed in her head, a constant reminder that the house was not just a home, but a trap, and that she had stepped into a nightmare that had been unfolding for generations. The key she held, now cold in her palm, had unlocked a door she couldn't close. She knew she couldn't turn back, not now, not after discovering the terrible secret hidden beneath the floorboards. Alice took a deep breath and scanned the room again. It was small, almost suffocating, with nothing but a single faded portrait on the wall, and the wooden box she had found. Yet there was something about the room that made her uneasy, something about the silence that felt wrong. The house was waiting, watching her every move. It was as if the walls themselves were breathing, aware of her presence. Her fingers tightened around the box, and without thinking, she stood and made her way to the corner of the room. The floorboards creaked beneath her feet, the sound unnaturally loud in the oppressive silence. She ran her hand along the edges of the room, her fingers tracing the grain of the wood, until they stopped on a spot that felt different. The boards here were loose, not nailed down like the others. Alice's heart pounded in her chest as she knelt down and pried at the edges of the floorboard. They came away easily, revealing a hidden compartment beneath them. A small rectangular space lay before her, covered in dust and old cobwebs. She reached in, her breath caught in her throat, and pulled out a second box. This one was smaller, much more delicate than the first. Its surface was etched with strange symbols, intricate and mysterious, none of which she recognized. With trembling hands, Alice opened the box. Inside was a piece of paper, yellowed with age, and a small vial filled with a dark liquid. The vial seemed to pulse with an eerie glow, as though it contained something alive. The paper was covered in more cryptic symbols and strange words, written in a language that Alice couldn't understand. The symbols danced before her eyes, as if they were moving, shifting, rearranging themselves. Her head spun, the air growing thick with the scent of decay. She had seen these symbols before. They were similar to the ones her grandfather had written in his journal, but it was the vial that terrified her. There was something about it, something about the way it shimmered in the dim light that made her skin crawl. She couldn't explain it, but deep down, Alice knew that the vial held the key to the curse. Whatever was inside it, whatever her family had hidden, it was connected to the darkness that had haunted them for generations. Alice's hands shook as she reached for the vial, her fingers trembling as she turned it over in her hand. The liquid inside was black, swirling like smoke, and as she held it up to the light, she saw something else, a faint shadow, moving within the liquid, as though something was alive inside it. Her mind raced, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place. Her grandfather had known what this was. He had known the house was more than just a home, more than just a place to live. It was a prison, and the curse was its foundation. The house had been built to keep something locked away, something that had been sealed for centuries, and now, Alice had found the key to that prison. But what was in the vial? What had her family done to bring this curse upon them? What had they awakened? She couldn't bring herself to open it, to unleash whatever was inside, yet the house seemed to hum, a low vibration that she could feel deep within her chest. It was calling to her, urging her to release the contents of the vial, to let whatever was trapped inside out. The walls seemed to close in around her, the air growing colder, heavier, until she could barely breathe. The whispering began again, faint, at first, like a soft breeze brushing against her ear. It was a voice, but not one that Alice recognized. It was ancient, filled with sorrow and anger, yet tinged with something else, a longing, a desire for freedom. The voice called her name. Alice's blood ran cold. She stood frozen, the vial still clutched in her hand. She could feel the house, the walls, the very air around her, pressing in, urging her to act. Her fingers curled tighter around the vial, and for a moment, she almost gave in. She almost let it go. But then something stopped her. It was a feeling, an instinct, deep within her soul. She knew, with a clarity that cut through the fear, that opening the vial would be a mistake. Whatever was inside, whatever had been sealed away for so long, was not meant to be free. It would destroy everything, everything her family had worked to hide. It would tear apart the fragile veil of normalcy that had been placed over their lives. It would consume her, as it had consumed. Alice slammed the vial back into its box, the sound of it hitting the wood louder than it should have been. She sealed the compartment beneath the floorboards, her heart hammering in her chest. The house seemed to grow quieter, the whispers fading away, but Alice knew that the house was not done with her. It would not let her leave, not until it had claimed her, body and soul. The house had fought back before, and now it would do so again. With the key still in her hand, Alice stood in the room, staring at the dark corner where the box had been hid. She could feel the weight of the curse pressing down on her. Her grandfather had tried to escape it, had tried to run away from the house, but he had failed. He had sealed himself away, hidden the truth from her, hoping she would never have to know. But she knew now. The curse wasn't just something that followed the Ashbourne family. It had become a part of them, and now it had claimed her too. Alice had barely slept since she found the hidden vial beneath the floorboard. The weight of its dark promise still lingered in her hands, the chilling whispers of the house echoing in her mind. She could feel the oppressive air closing in around her, as though the walls of the house were silently watching, waiting for her next move. The mansion felt alive, alive in a way that Alice had never noticed before. She could no longer dismiss the creeping sensation that the house itself was filled with memories, its floors stained with the anguish of past generations, and yet she couldn't bring herself to leave. There was something here, something beneath the surface, that called to her. The darkness that had haunted her family for so long was now a part of her too. She could feel it in her blood, swirling like the liquid in the vial, dark and suffocate. Alice found herself wandering the house in the dead of night, as though compelled by forces beyond her understanding. The air was colder now, the shadows deep, even the familiar creaks of the old house felt foreign, as though each sound was a warning, a reminder that something was waiting for her in the darkness. She tried to ignore the tightening in her chest, the quickening of her breath, but the house wouldn't let her forget. The whispers returned, faint at first, barely audible, like the wind rustling through the trees, then louder, more insistent. The voice that had called her name earlier now spoke with more urgency, more desperation. "You know what must be done," it said, the words slipping into her mind like a slow poison. "Release it, let it out, set it free." Her hands shook as she clutched the vial again, her mind racing. It was like a dream she couldn't wake from, a nightmare that held her captive, pulling her deeper with every breath she took. The house had become her prison, and the key was right in her hand. She felt like she was teetering on the edge of a precipice, the abyss below waiting to swallow her whole.
But Alice fought the urge. She wouldn't release whatever was trapped inside the vial. Her grandfather had hidden it for a reason. He had known the consequences, and yet, the more she resisted, the stronger the pull became. She could feel the presence in the house, something ancient, something dark, reaching out to her, pulling her closer to the edge of madness. Days blurred together in the house. She no longer kept track of time, the days and nights blending into one endless stretch of oppressive silence and oppressive whispers. She began to lose herself in the house, her grip on reality slipping like sand through her fingers. Her family's curse had taken root in her mind, and she couldn't escape it. The walls closed in tighter, and with each passing hour, the house seemed to grow larger, more ominous. The shadows stretched longer, creeping into every corner of the mansion, swallowing everything in their path. Alice could no longer tell if she was awake or dreaming. The line between the two had become so thin that it no longer mattered. The house had become a part of her, a force that shaped her thoughts, her actions, her very being. She wandered through its halls like a sleepwalker, her mind clouded, her thoughts disconnected from reality. It wasn't long before Alice started to see things. At first it was just out of the corner of her eye, shadows that moved when they shouldn't, flickers of light in empty rooms, faint sounds that echoed through the walls. But the longer she stayed in the house, the more vivid the visions became. Faces in the mirrors, figures standing at the edge of her vision, their features blurred and indistinct. She'd blink, and they'd be gone, but their presence lingered, a cold shiver down her spine. It wasn't just the house that was changing, it was her too. She could feel herself slipping, the curse taking hold of her mind. The voice in her head grew stronger, urging her to release the vial, to let the darkness out. "It will be over soon," the voice whispered. "All you need to do is open it, set us free." The words twisted in her mind, like vines creeping through her thoughts, wrapping around her sanity. Her skin began to crawl, her nerves raw with the constant pressure of the house's influence. Her hands shook uncontrollably, her thoughts fragmented, like shards of glass, scattered across the floor. She felt like she was losing herself, becoming something else entirely. The house had already claimed her soul, and there was no turning back. It was then that Alice heard the sound, a soft, faint tapping, like fingers drumming on the walls. She froze, listening intently. The tapping grew louder, more insistent, echoing through the house, like a heartbeat. It was coming from the walls, from the floors, from every. She could feel it vibrating in her chest, resonating deep within her bones. The house was alive, and it was calling to her. She ran. She didn't know where she was going, only that she needed to escape, to get away from the house, from the curse. She sprinted through the halls, her footsteps echoing in the empty mansion. But no matter how fast she ran, the house never let her go. The walls seemed to close in around her, the air thick with the scent of decay. The tapping grew louder, more frantic, until it felt like the house itself was trying to tear her apart. Alice stumbled into the library, gasping for breath, her heart pounding in her chest. She slammed the door behind her, but the tapping didn't stop. It was in the walls, in the floorboards, in the very fabric of the house. She turned to face the shelves, her mind racing for a way out, but there was no escape. The curse had already claimed her, and there was no way to outrun it. The voice spoke again, clearer now, its words sharp and cold. "You can't escape. You are one of us now." Alice collapsed to the floor, her hands clutching her head, her mind unraveling. The house had won. There was no way out. The curse had claimed her, just as it had claimed her family before her. The walls closed in. The tapping grew louder, and the house swallowed her whole. Alice awoke to the sound of silence. It wasn't the stillness of peace, but the quiet before something inevitable. A void so deep, it threatened to swallow her entirely. She had no idea how much time had passed since the chaos of the house had consumed her. But something had changed. She was no longer in the library, nor was she in any room she recognized. Her eyes fluttered open, and the world around her was blurred. The once grand mansion now looked like a forgotten relic, an ancient tomb that had stood for centuries. The walls were no longer adorned with portraits or the flicker of chandeliers. There was only darkness, a suffocating darkness that seemed to creep into every crevice. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and decay. Alice struggled to sit up, the weight of her limbs feeling foreign and heavy, as if they had been asleep for an eternity. Her breath was ragged, every inhalation scraping against her lungs, but she forced herself to rise. The sensation of something watching her, of being trapped within an inescapable force, gripped her chest and sent waves of nausea through her stomach. The house had changed. It was no longer a place of family history, of wealth and grandeur. It was a maze of death, a twisted landscape where the laws of time and space no longer applied. The walls seemed to pulse with an eerie energy, and Alice felt every inch of the house pressing in on her. The voices, the whispers that had tormented her for weeks, were now gone, but in their absence, there was something far worse, an oppressive sense of dread, like the very fabric of the house was alive, breathing, waiting. She stumbled forward, her feet dragging along the cold stone floor. The house seemed to shift as she moved, its halls narrowing and expanding in impossible ways. She could hear the faint echoes of footsteps, but they weren't her own. Someone else was in the house with her, someone who had never left. As she passed through the rooms, memories flooded back, flashes of her family's history, their pain, their suffering, and the curse that had followed them. She could almost hear their voices, calling to her, urging her to break free. But the weight of the house kept pulling her back, chaining her to the past. Suddenly, a door creaked open. Alice froze, her body tensing, her breath catching in her throat. It wasn't the soft groan of an old house shifting under its own weight. No, this sound was deliberate, controlled. A presence behind the door, something ancient, something that knew her name. The door swung wide, revealing a shadowed figure standing in the doorway. Alice's heart skipped a beat. The figure was tall, cloaked in darkness, its features indistinguishable in the dim light. It didn't move, it simply stood there, waiting. Alice's instincts screamed at her to run, but her legs wouldn't obey. She felt rooted to the spot, her body paralyzed by a force she couldn't understand. The figure stepped forward, its movement fluid, almost predatory. Alice could feel its gaze, its eyes boring into her very soul. Then the voice spoke. "You're not the first," it said, its voice a low, guttural whisper. "You're not the first to be trapped in this place, but you will be the last." Alice's pulse raced. The words sent a chill down her spine, a feeling of impending doom settling over her. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came. It was as if the very air had been stolen from her lungs. The figure reached out, and Alice flinched, stepping back in a futile attempt to escape. But it was no use. The figure's hand closed around her wrist, cold and unyielding,
and she felt a surge of energy course through her. It was unlike anything she had ever felt before. It wasn't pain, but something far worse, a darkness that seemed to seep into her very bones. The world around her began to shift again, the walls bending and twisting as if the house itself was alive. The figure's grip tightened, and Alice felt her mind being pulled into the darkness, her thoughts scattering like leaves in a storm. "Your family has been here for centuries," the figure whispered. "You too will remain forever." Suddenly, the room around Alice collapsed. The floor beneath her feet gave way, and she plunged into the void, falling faster and faster, the darkness closing in around her. But then, just as quickly she stopped, she was no longer falling. She was standing on solid ground again, her feet planted in a place she couldn't recognize. The air was thick, but no longer oppressive. There were no shadows here, no creeping whisper. It was as if the house had released her, had let her go. She looked around, confused, disoriented. This place, it was unfamiliar, yet it felt like home. The walls were made of dark stone, covered in ancient markings and symbols. The ground beneath her feet was cold, but smooth, like polished marble. She could feel the pulse of energy in the air, the same energy that had gripped her when she first touched the vial. In front of her stood a large stone altar, its surface etched with the same markings that adorned the wall, and above it, carved into the stone itself, was a name, Ashford. The name felt familiar, too familiar. Alice took a step closer to the altar, her mind racing. The symbols on the stone, the carvings in the walls, they were all connected. She could feel it now, deep in her bones. The curse that had haunted her family, the darkness that had followed them for generations, was here, and now, it was calling to her. She reached out to touch the altar, but as her fingers brushed the stone, a sharp pain shot through her hand. She pulled back, gasping, and looked down. Her skin was burning, the marks from the altar searing into her flesh. The pain was unbearable, but she didn't pull away. She couldn't. And then, just as the pain reached its peak, the world exploded in light. Alice stood in the center of the stone chamber, her hand still tingling from the contact with the altar. The air around her vibrated with an otherworldly hum, and she could feel the power that had haunted her family for generations, swirling like a storm. Every breath she took felt heavy, as if the weight of centuries pressed down on her chest. She had uncovered the truth. Now, she had to face the consequences. The light that had exploded around her faded, leaving her in complete darkness. She blinked, trying to adjust her eyes, but the blackness was so thick, it felt as though it had swallowed the world whole. She could no longer see the markings on the walls, the altar, or the carved symbols that had once seemed so familiar. Only the oppressive silence surrounded her, and for a moment, she wondered if she had truly been transported to another time and place, or if she had simply fallen into her own mind, lost forever. A cold wind blew through the chamber, carrying with it the unmistakable scent of damp earth. The smell was familiar, one she had smelled earlier in the mansion, but now, it felt closer, more intimate. It seemed to wrap around her, tugging at her very being, as if the house itself was alive, reaching out to claim. She reached out cautiously, her hands trembling, as she groped for any sign of stability. Her fingers brushed against the cold stone walls, but they felt different now. They were no longer smooth. They were rough, jagged, and alive with the energy that had been haunting her family for generations. It was as if the house had transformed, adapting to her presence, waiting for her to make the next move. A voice, faint, distant, yet unmistakable, whispered through the darkness, "You cannot escape." Alice froze, her heart slammed in her chest, and a chill ran down her spine. The voice was familiar, but she couldn't place it. It was like a distant echo from her past, a shadow that lurked just beyond her memory. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself, but the words resonated deep within her, stirring something primal in her soul. "The curse will follow you. It will never release you."
The voice grew louder, closer. It wasn't coming from anywhere specific. It was everywhere, swirling around her, weaving through the stone walls. Alice could feel the weight of its presence pressing against her, like 1,000 unseen eyes watching her every move. You are part of it now. The bloodline has already claimed you. Alice's mind reeled. The voice, it was a part of the house, part of the curse that had plagued her family. She knew it now, without a doubt. This was the force that had driven her ancestors to madness, to destruction. It had whispered to them, twisted their minds, and bound them to this place for eternity. And now it was speaking to her, telling her the same lies, the same twisted truths. But Alice refused to believe it. She had already come so far, uncovered so much. She couldn't let the curse win now. She had to break free. Taking another deep breath, she pushed forward. She knew the truth now. The curse wasn't just some distant legend. It wasn't some ghostly tale told to frighten children. It was real. It was the very essence of the house, woven into its foundation, buried deep within its walls, and it had claimed every member of her family for centuries. But she wasn't like them. She had fought her way through the darkness, through the lies, through the pain. She had uncovered the secrets of the house, and now she would free herself from its grip. The wind picked up again, howling through the chamber, rattling the walls like a storm. The sound was deafening, a chaotic roar that seemed to fill every corner of her mind. The voice grew stronger, more insistent, but Alice wasn't afraid anymore. She knew what she had to do. She began to walk, slowly at first, her feet brushing against the cold stone floor. Each step felt like a defiance, like a rejection of the curse that had followed her family for so long. The air grew thicker, the walls pressing in on her, but she pushed forward, determined to reach the end. The path seemed to stretch on forever, twisting and turning in ways that defied logic. The house was shifting again, its very structure warping as she walked, as if it were alive, adapting to her movements. But Alice didn't stop. She couldn't. She had to keep moving. The whispers of the house followed her, wrapping around her like a suffocating cloak. But she shut them out. She could feel their grip weakening, their power slipping away with each step. The house could no longer control her. She was in control now. And then, just as she thought she could take no more, the path opened up before her. The darkness lifted, and she found herself standing in front of a door. It was massive, carved from dark wood, with intricate symbols etched into its surface. It was the final door, the one that had been locked away, the one that had held the secret of her family's curse. She stepped forward, her hand trembling as she reached for the doorknob. But as her fingers brushed against the cold metal, the door creaked open on its own. The room beyond was shrouded in shadow, but Alice could feel the energy pulsing from within. She could feel the house waiting, watching, as if it were holding its breath. Taking one final breath, Alice stepped into the room, and the world changed. The room Alice stepped into was unlike any she had seen before. The darkness clung to the air, thick and oppressive, yet she could feel a strange warmth radiating from the walls. A low hum vibrated through her bones, like the echo of a heartbeat. The faint scent of incense filled her nostrils, carrying with it an ancient, almost ritualistic presence. As she ventured deeper into the room, her eyes slowly adjusted to the dim light. Candles flickered on ancient stone pedestals, casting elongated shadows across the walls. They were arranged in a perfect circle, their flames dancing in rhythm, with the hum that reverberated through the floor. In the center of the room was a pedestal, upon which rested a single book. The book was old, its leather cover cracked, its pages yellowed with age. It seemed to pulse with an energy of its own, as if it were waiting for her. Alice approached it slowly, her heart racing with anticipation. This was it, the source of everything, the answers she had been searching for all these years, the key to the curse that had plagued her family for generations.
were contained within this ancient, forbidden diary. She hesitated for only a moment before reaching out and touching the cover. The moment her fingers made contact, a surge of energy shot through her, and the room seemed to come alive. The walls groaned as though the house itself were waking from a deep slumber, responding to her touch. With a deep breath, she opened the book. The pages inside were filled with strange, meticulous handwriting, ancient script that seemed to shimmer and change with every glance. Alice could feel the weight of the words pressing against her mind as she began to read. It was a story of her family. Yes, but it was much more than that. It was the history of the curse itself, the dark forces that had been passed down through the Ashbourne bloodline. Each generation, each family member, had unknowingly contributed to the growing power of the curse. The diary detailed the twisted rituals, the blood offerings, and the unholy pacts that had been made over the centuries. And at the center of it all was a name that Alice had known all along but had never fully understood. The name was her. The Ashbourne family curse wasn't just some inherited affliction. It was a legacy, a burden that had been passed down through the ages, tied to the very fabric of her existence. The diary revealed that her bloodline was the key to the curse's power, the anchor that kept it alive. Every ancestor, every relative, had played a role in weaving the dark thread that bound the family to this house, to this land, and to the unseen forces that dwelled within it. Alice's eyes widened as she read the final passage. The one who awakens the blood shall break the chain, or it shall claim them. The words echoed in her mind like a warning, a prophecy. It was clear now. Alice wasn't just a victim of the curse. She was its ultimate purpose. She had been chosen to either destroy it or be consumed by it. The house, the bloodline, the curse, it all led to her. She had unknowingly walked the path laid out for her by those who had come before. But what did it mean to break the chain? What choice did she have? Could she truly end the curse, or had it already claimed her? The room began to shift around her as the shadows deepened, closing in on her with a suffocating grip. The walls seemed to close in, and Alice's vision blurred. She could hear whispers again, faint at first, then growing louder. "You cannot leave. The curse will follow you forever." Her heart pounded in her chest, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The air around her grew thicker as though the very space was being crushed. She stumbled backward, her hand still gripping the diary. The walls groaned, the sound becoming unbearable, like the death rattle of a dying beast. But Alice refused to let go. She had come this far, and she wouldn't let the curse win. She had to fight, had to break free. She turned and ran, her feet pounding against the cold stone floor. The house seemed to fight her every step of the way, the walls shifting and warping, the shadows reaching out to grab her. But Alice didn't stop. She had the answers now. She understood what needed to be done. As she reached the doorway, she glanced over her shoulder. The book was glowing, faintly in her hand, its power pulsing through her. She couldn't let it fall into the wrong hands. She couldn't let the curse spread any further. The house rumbled around her, the very earth beneath her feet shaking with the force of an ancient power awakening. But Alice ran faster, determined to escape the grip of the house that had bound her family for so long. She broke through the door, her body slamming into the wall beyond. For a moment she lay there gasping for air, the world spinning around. But then she felt it, the weight of the curse lifting. The house, the shadows, the whispers, they were all fading, dissipating into the air like smoke. She had broken the chain. Alice stood, her body trembling with exhaustion. The book in her hands had stopped glowing, its power seemingly extinguished. The curse had been broken. But at what cost? She looked around, the mansion now eerily silent. The weight that had hung over her family for generations was gone. But as she walked away, she knew that the echoes of the past would always haunt. She had freed herself, yes, but the memories, the stories, the curse, they would remain. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more mysteries that will keep you on the edge of your seat.